Welcome, gentlemen and gentlewomen. Also, please carry along your gentle children as well. Today is January the 19th. We don't really have anything too interesting to point out that happened in history right now, so let's get on with the topic of the day. The topic of the day is what's been going on in Mythic Plus. No, it's not our usual weekly update on the meta of Mythic Plus. That's gonna come in a couple of days. For today, we have a question instead. The question of what's been going on in Mythic Plus dungeons. Why do they feel so overly complicated? Why do the mobs all feel like they have 3 to 4 different abilities that you have to keep track of nowadays? Why have the dungeons been made so much more brimming with things, essentially, with stuff to keep track of? Basically, this is something you very easily realize when you go and look at the dungeon's success chance as well as the amount of runs per dungeon. You're gonna be seeing things like these, or things like these, telling you more or less the same thing. Shadowmoon, Burial Grounds, Court of Stars and Temple of the Jade Serpent are amongst the easier ones, whereas dungeons like Ruby Life Pools, like Azure Vault and like Nokud Offensive are amongst the harder ones. The only 2 dungeons overlapping and changing the course of this trend are Halls of Valor, which is one of the older dungeons being a little bit harder, and Algetar Academy, which is one of the newer dungeons being a little bit easier. But beyond these, it's 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 of the older dungeons seem to be all quite easy, and 3 out of 4 of the newer dungeons all seem to be quite hard. So I'm spotting a trend here, okay? I'm spotting some kind of direction that these dungeons are taking. And, you know, it's kind of understandable, because when you enter, okay, when you step foot into Nokud Offensive, you know you have to keep track of Shatter Soul, which is going to not only chunk your damage by 30%, but you also have to waste some time going to pick up back your soul. Also, it's difficult to find because there is a whole bunch of other particle effects and spells happening all over the place, which makes it even harder to notice. Then you have to take track of the Deathbolt volley that you need to interrupt, the Deathbolt cast that you need to interrupt, the Harvest Soul, which is effectively an enrage effect of the mob whenever one of the players in your party dies, plus the Chant of the Dead you need to get away from, the Grasp of the Dead you need to get away from, you have the Rotting Wind of the birds, the cone in front of you that you need to get away from, the Mortal Strike on the tank that is going to eventually make it harder and harder for you to keep your tank alive. You know, this seems to be a lot of things you have to keep track of when you're doing this dungeon. But here's the kicker. This is not just in a dungeon. This is in a single pack of a single set of trash mobs, just 5 enemies. That is just the amount of abilities they are going to have, just the 5 of them. And that seems to be the problem nowadays. These dungeons seem to be over-designed. They seem to have way more things that you have to keep track of. Essentially, Blizzard went hard at work trying to find the best ways to create combos, to create some layups for the mobs to find ways to one-shot you, or to still make your life a living hell. Abilities like Living Bomb, which do a lot of damage and they are unavoidable. They're just gonna be cast on you and you have to deal with it. At the same time though, Inferno is gonna happen, which is also unavoidable. Those two can be quite dangerous together. You know what can make this even more dangerous? The fact that there are going to be mobs spam casting Cinderbolt. So now you have Inferno, and then you have Cinderbolt, which can kill you in 1 hit. And then you also have Living Bomb with Cinderbolt, which can kill you in 1 hit. And if that's not enough, when you have Living Bomb and you're getting knocked up in the air, imagine if there are some mobs casting Flame Dance or casting Blaze of Glory, and essentially carpet bombing the entire place with swirlies on the ground as you're getting knocked up by Living Bomb. That's also gonna one-shot you. There is a whole bunch of mechanics, there seems to be a whole bunch of mechanics, and also multiples of them per each mob, sort of designed to be annoying. You know, sometimes back in the good old days, a dangerous mob had a cast, you interrupted the cast, the mob was now chill. Everything was cool. Nowadays, it's no longer like that. Nowadays, if Blizzard develops a mob which has a single dangerous ability you want to interrupt, they are going to develop something like the Conjured Lasher, the first plant trash mobs in Azure Vault. Yes, they only have one ability, but there is 3 of them per pack, and you're pulling 2 of them, and you're pulling 2 of these packs. Sometimes, if your group is a bunch of chads, they are pulling 3 packs of these, with 9 of them casting Mystic Vapors. It makes it much more challenging, you know, and the layups, the combos continue. You're pulling the Unstable Curator, which casts Forbidden Knowledge, you know, the whole spam of circles on the ground in the trash mob rings of Azure Vault, and at the same time you're gonna have Icy Bindings. If it lets to be cast, if the cast goes through, you're going to be rooted, and then you're rooted with circles being spawned under your feet, and you get one shot and you die. While all of this is happening, the tank has to manage the big guys casting piercing shards, nearly one-shotting the tank if he's not a protection warrior, and most of the time also one-shotting the spazzing out demon hunter who just fell rushed in front of the tank and killed himself. And here I am complaining about Azure Vault, and I haven't even mentioned the Frog Gauntlet of Doom. Another example of the ways dungeons are developed nowadays. You know, this is even a deceiving set of trash, because the frogs in here do nothing but jump around. The Tarasek Lashers in here do nothing other than applying a bleed to the tank, but then you have this guy. Then you have the one who casts Bestial Roar AoE to the entire party and then casts Shoulder Slam, which is also a knockback. You can get shoulder slammed, you can get knocked back into a frog jumping, so essentially you get one shot. You can get knocked back when you pull 2 of these guys. You can get shoulder slam right at the same time as you're getting Bestial Roar, so you can get one shot that way as well. And just in general, there seem to be a whole lot of combos, a whole lot of ways for the trash mobs to just deal with you, essentially, rather than you dealing with them. This apparently and clearly does not seem to happen nearly as much when we look at older dungeons. Usually older dungeons have 1 or 2 very dangerous abilities. Once you clear those abilities, you are fine, you are good to go. Most of those abilities feel fair. They feel like you had a role, you completed, you fulfilled your role, and now you get to continue. Like, for example, Fell Detonation. A whole bunch of damage and you have to line of sight it. If you do, you're clear. Or, for example, the Embarrassment of Court of Stars. Back in the days, this was the doom of pugs. The imps. If you layer your crowd control correctly, the imps just die and you're good to go. Otherwise, you embarrass yourself and you all die at once. It felt back then, and it still feels right now, much more fair, so to speak, than the way the current dungeons, the modern dungeons of Dragonflight have been developed. It also feels like you have to put a lot of stress on players to keep track of things, especially in the world of pugs. In the world where you don't have voice communication, or you don't really go for voice comms, you have to do everything just randomly without knowing what your player next to you is going to do. So who is going to interrupt what, who is going to stun, who is going to knock up what and when. It makes it even harder in these new Dragonflight dungeons when you have so many things that you need to keep track of. You know, that seems to be the main issue many players have had for now in this new season of Dragonflight. Not to mention, in case you want to look at the future to find some hopium, reminder that we still don't have in the pool of dungeons, and we will have in the pool of Mythic Plus dungeons next season, dungeons like Halls of Infusion and dungeons like Brackenhide Hollow, both of which were already touted to be the worst dungeons, and this was back during Mythic 0 days. So imagine how nice they will feel once we get them into the Mythic Plus pool due to the overloadedness of abilities, mechanics, and things to keep track of those 2 dungeons. So no, things won't change in Season 2, things will continue, and if anything, will actually get worse. We don't actually know which type of old dungeons we are gonna get in Season 2. Right now, we sort of lucked out. We got some pretty nice, pretty chill dungeons to deal with, especially Court of Stars and Shadow Moon Burial Grounds were quite good. yes, sure, we took the L with Oaths of Valor, but the rest of the dungeons were quite manageable. It's very likely that next season we are not going to get nearly as good of a set of older dungeons for the pool of Mythic Plus. So I guess in short, the question I wanted to give out to all of the viewers in here was, how have you felt the dungeons so far in this season? If you agree with this sentiment of constantly feeling like you're getting overwhelmed by mechanics, like you are no longer trying to do DPS. When you're pulling a trash pack, you are now trying to survive when you're pulling a trash pack. If you did good DPS, that's a plus, okay? That's a bonus, a benefit, but the main important thing was that you managed to stay alive, to interrupt, stop, block as many mechanics as possible during that trash pack, which is a different feeling than what we had in previous expansions. At least that is the feeling I have, even playing as a healer with a much less powerful interrupt and fewer ways to sneak in crowd control abilities inside trash packs. I still feel it myself. The amount of things that can be quite annoying, and also the amount of things that you don't have a way to address, especially in pugs. You run out of answers, essentially. You run out of ways to deal with certain annoying things because you just use them all, and those mobs are still casting. Those mobs are still moving, those mobs are still doing things you don't want them to do, but you simply have no more ways to stop them from doing so. That seems to be the main thing I noticed when trying to do Mythic Plus this season. Yes, on the plus side, we have been getting more and more nerfs over time. That's true. We have been getting the, several set of nerfs, not just to trash mobs that we have been mentioning, but also to bosses. Still though, all of them, both the trash and the bosses, have been nerfed significantly, so things have been made not nearly as bad. However, what we have been nerfing is the numbers. So all of those abilities, all of those extra mechanics and things to keep track of are still there. All of that bloat, all of that extra is still there. It's just that the numbers now are a little bit smaller, but it's not changing the problem with the developing, essentially the mentality of how those trash mobs have been developed for these dungeons. So overall, I feel like the TLDR is that we have gotten a little bit overboard in developing these new season's dungeons when it comes to mechanics, when it comes to abilities, with threats, with things to keep track of and to essentially be aware of in a Mythic Plus key. I think if we tone it down a little bit, if we still keep some very dangerous abilities but not split them into 3 every time, it would be better for the average enjoyment of a Mythic Plus key, for the average player. Let me guys know what you think about this topic of Mythic Plus so far in this season, after a month or so of the expansion being open for Mythic Plus. In the meantime, we can leave each other on this Thursday. I am going to leave first by thanking, as usual, my Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to grow myself and this channel. You can still, however, don't forget, you can still support in other ways, which don't include having to spend money, like liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. For further ways to support, you can follow me on Twitter. That would help as well. You can find on Twitter communications on whenever I will be going live on my stream, or for example, whenever I have things to point out to all of my viewers. That's where I will be generally. And also, you should be able to find me on Twitch streaming again, finally, in a couple of days, or tomorrow, I think, this weekend anyways. Usually I'm going to start from 10 PM Central European times, 1 PM Pacific and 4 PM Eastern US time zones. So with this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, it's still there a little bit, the pain. Perhaps it's just me speaking while being completely medicated in painkillers, but it's not nearly as bad. I think I can survive a few hours of streaming.